Welcome, everybody. It is May 5th, 2021, and today is a special work session. So typically our work sessions might be a little shorter. Today we're have time planned until 6:30. Our topic is a really important one. It is the board assessment training provided by the Special Districts Association of Oregon. However, I do recognize, since it's going a little later and I know there's competing things going on, that we will try our best to swiftly move through the materials as best that we can. And as always, if there's questions or follow-up that don't get addressed today, please make sure that you reach out so we can get those answered for you. I'm going to do a quick roll call now that this meeting has been called to order. So I'm going to start with Joshua Scove.
Here.
All right, thanks, Josh. Don Norden.
Here.
Thanks, Don. Michelle Weber.
Here.
Thanks, Michelle. Stephen Yett.
Here.
Thank you. And Susan Cox.
Here.
Thank you. And Emily C. Cord let me know she would not be attending this evening. So really fast, any comments from the board president, AJ?
I have no comments.
Okay. Great. I also have no comments except for to say thank you for making the time to get this done today. As I mentioned, it's something that is important and will really help guide our work through the rest of this year. So without further ado, I want to introduce Terry. I'll let Terry talk a little bit about herself and what we're going to be doing today, and then she will be our lead presenter today. So welcome, Terry.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Volume okay? So I am a senior consultant with Special District Association of Oregon, and one of the services we provide is a board practices assessment. This will definitely go no longer than the 90 minutes, and oftentimes it ends a little more quickly than that. And this really is not a training. This is your opportunity to have honest conversation about how you feel the board is functioning. And I have a structure that you all can see on that handout. It will just work through some key areas that are really indicators of good risk management. So it's really an assessment from sort of a managing risk from the board's perspective. And the consulting group at SDAO falls under the risk management arm of the organization. And so that's sort of the thrust of this, is to ensure that you all are aware of these key pieces that boards need to be aware of to function well and, remain within the bounds of good government practices. So this really is your opportunity to share and have a conversation amongst yourselves, and I'll take notes. And as we go through each section, I'll ask you to rate yourselves with the green, yellow, and red. And some groups see a little of a couple colors in each category, and that's okay too. And then within a week, I'll send you a summary of my observations, and if I have recommendations for you, I'll put those in the memo as well, and I'll type up the notes as clearly as I recall them from this session tonight. And then within 60 days, SDAO just asks that you talk about this at your next board meeting and talk about any actions that you might take as a result of any of the conversation we've had and the recommendations that I would have in my memo. And in exchange for that, SDAO gives the district a 4% premium reduction. And it's just a really valuable thing for SDAO to have boards be more aware of how they're functioning, and if there are any spots that need to be poked or further developed or have additional training, there's all kinds of things available and resources, and I'm sure you're aware of lots of those resources already. But so that's really the the thrust of tonight. So it's really about you having this conversation. So I will be taking notes and looking away from the camera, but it's not that I'm not interested. I'm just trying to capture everything you're saying. So without further ado, if there's any questions about that, please let me know. Anything, anybody? It's pretty straightforward. All right, so I will kick off, and I assume you've either seen or have the handout in front of you, and so we'll just follow that handout and go through those key performance areas. So the first area is about your board duties and responsibilities and adherence to standards of good stewardship. And as you all know, as a publicly elected board, you're stewards of the public trust, and there's resources, both physical resources and financial resources, delivery of services, oversight of operations. And what I really want to hear from you is just a conversation about how you all feel you're doing, adhering to standards of good stewardship of the public trust.
Just as a clarification, we're actually appointed by the governor, not elected.
And I knew that. Thank you for reminding me. I'm following my notes that I use for everybody, but I read that on your website. Thank you.
No worries. Didn't want to just remain silent and appear to take credit for something we didn't do.
Okay. Does anybody want to comment on that? Anybody feel like you're doing a great job? You're doing a good job? You've got room for improvement?
You don't mind?
Terry, you can probably just call on people if you see hands raised in the chat, or not in the chat, excuse me, in the participants screen. So for example, when you open that, you can see Stephen has his hand raised. So
I'm
feel free
sorry.
to just, no, you're fine. Just feel free to call on people and lead the discussion.
Okay.
Actually, if you're taking notes, Terry, we can monitor that for you. Would you prefer?
It's okay. I just, most boards aren't quite as sophisticated to raise hands. So now I see it. Okay, Stephen.
Thank you, Terry.
That's the green category already.
That's,
You guys are great.
I think we do an outstanding job of raising and lowering hands, and I think we could definitely get a green mark for that. Now, I think on a serious note, I think regarding the stewardship, in my opinion, I think we do a good job of engaging the GM and staff and ask questions as appropriate and are engaged.
Okay. Does anybody else have other thoughts about your interaction with the staff and like the management team, and you feel like that's enough, not enough?
This one's feeling a little undefined to me. Maybe say a little more about what you mean by good stewardship, especially separate from governance. Well,
I'm trying to think about, so I think in decision-making conversations, when you are in a planning exercise, for example, are there open conversation with the public and with the staff so that when a plan comes together and a project is executed or a program is put in place, is that something that you feel if you asked a member of the public, they would reflect back that they felt you were spending the resources wisely in a way that truly benefited the community that you were intending to benefit with that program or that project? Is that?
Yeah, that helps. I mean, that's definitely one area I can see being under this. That's helpful. I guess on that point, I think we would get mixed reviews from the public, but mainly because the things that have attracted the most attention of late are still open questions, like transit tomorrow and moving ahead. Two of the big policy and investment and intergovernmental projects we're working on.
Okay.
And I think there's also, as Josh, I think, was just hinting at, there's a distinction between the board being transparent and making a given decision, and on whether that decision is well received by all the public or part of the public. So I'm not so sure that if the public doesn't like a given decision, or part of the public doesn't like a given decision, that necessarily means the board did not do its job of being transparent and communicating. That being said, I think there have been decisions in the past that possibly we could have done better in communicating with the broader community.
Right. It's not always a popularity contest. You make tough decisions all the time as a board, and that's not things you're necessarily going to get an excellent review always from the public. But I think this question can be difficult if we're not talking about it's a specific issue. This is more about process and not so much about the content of the work and the things that you normally are making decisions about in your meetings. This is more about, are your processes that you go through as board members in thinking about your strategic decisions moving forward, and these large projects that you mentioned you're in the middle of working on, are those processes designed such a way that you are making every effort to involve as many people in thinking about that and giving you input, and are you also thinking about what the best investment of the dollars that you're responsible for? I think that's a huge thing. So I've got Don, you want to talk about that?
Okay, I'm just thinking of the interaction between the public and the board and the staff. I mean, a lot of this stuff is staff driven. And in our board meetings, we're allowed to receive testimony, but we do not interact with the public. And that's just the way that the board has been defined ever since I've been on it. So that, there's really no interaction with the public except for outside of, whatever we do outside of the actions of the district and the board. So it's individual stuff. And then, that's all mitigated by what the staff does, and our information comes from the staff. So a lot of this stuff is, we work on it for a long time. We'll be educated about it. And hopefully by the time we come up to a decision point, we're all pretty much in agreement by that time. And by that time, the staff has already done their due diligence with educating the community. And if they have not, then we hear about that, and then more work has to be done. But, there's just not a lot of interaction of the board and the community directly.
Right. Okay. Josh, do you have input on that?
Yeah, just is kind of riffing on what Stephen, I think, was queuing up a little bit. I think, for example, with Transit Tomorrow, I think this is a really good example. I think we were very clear about our policy intent. And so we were clear on the decision and our rationale for it, but we did not return to those messages, and we did not ask staff to return to those messages. So even as it was petering out, and even, or sort of as it got shelved early in the pandemic, and then into the pandemic when we were still getting questions from people, we didn't actually really have a process for responding and for like making clear to the public why we had gone the direction we'd gone. So I feel like we don't quite have those mechanisms. We don't have habits, much less formal mechanisms for like really consistently delivering and re-delivering our policy messages to the public. So I feel like this is sort of a, you know, in the middle category.
Okay.
On that particular facet of what you've asked about.
Okay.
Can I pause really quick? And I just want to recognize the fact that Emily Secord has joined the meeting. So hi, Emily.
Hi, Emily.
So I'm hearing that, I mean, generally based on your comments, I would put you in the good category. I mean, I don't think we have to take a super deep dive into this, but there's obviously interaction with the staff, and I think that you know, there's questions asked when it's appropriate, and I think the public's aware of what's going on, and they're interacting, and the staff is hearing their feedback on things that would bubble up to you at some point if there was a need for that. So it sounds like the good category is appropriate there for you. So let's go on to the next one and talk about demonstration of good governance practices. And any of you that could talk about how confident you are about the board's working knowledge of just sort of the process of public meetings and how you conduct your business. Are you, do you get materials in advance? Are you briefed on things that you need to be briefed on so you're prepared for decisions that you need to be making? Are notices out to the public on a regular basis if they want to participate? And just could you, anybody talk a little bit about governance practices? Steve? Go ahead.
Thank you. I'd say that we do a pretty darn good job of that. And I think in part, we need to thank the clerk of the board, Camille, who does a very good job of getting material out in a timely fashion. And also, I think some recognition should go to the GM, AJ, to making that clear, I imagine, to Camille. So I think overall, the distribution of material and such so the board can be informed is done well.
Okay. Does anybody else have either the same or a different feeling about that? Would you all agree that you're in the green category? Oh, I'm sorry, Don.
Well, I don't know if this is appropriate now, but it's something I've wanted to discuss, and maybe this is a point to just touch in with it, is I feel there's a mechanism in our election of the board, president, vice president, our board officers, that is undefined. And I've looked at other things, and it seems, I know on other boards I've been on, it's a little more defined, the process by which a selection is done. We have to do everything in the open, so there's no secret ballots. But I would suggest that we could use a ranked choice ballot at the same time. That way, there's an undercurrent of, well, I felt it in this election and also other elections that I've been in, is and then just not an understanding of how the nomination process works, how the flow of the election goes. It doesn't seem well defined to me. And I felt there should be another sentence or two in the description of the election process in order to make that process more clear. Now, I haven't written it out myself, but it's something I've been thinking about. And I would hope to engage with our attorney, in a couple of months or someplace where we're not always hammered with a lot of work to do at the moment. So I'm looking for a point, where we can spend 15 minutes on this sometime in August, perhaps. But I thought I'd mention it now since it seemed to be in the discussion. And I'll leave that at that.
Okay, thank you. Josh?
Actually, this kind of fits with what Don said. I wouldn't have picked that example, though I would agree that the way elections are specified or sort of not specified are a little clunky in our bylaws. I think actually, having read all of our bylaws like multiple times, and not like as a cure for insomnia, but just trying to understand, they're really skimpy. So if I were going to focus on one formal piece of governance, I would say we should actually spend time with our bylaws and kind of change some of the mechanisms, maybe actually create mechanisms where there are none. Right now, there's just a lot left up to interpretation, and everything sort of devolves automatically to the board president, which might or might not be fine at any given moment in time. Of course, it's fine right now, Caitlin. But the serious part is that it is there just isn't a lot in there about how to make decisions on certain things. So I would say our bylaws are a little bit thin. The second thing I was going to say that I think goes under this one, I looked through the whole sheet and I can't really find another place for it except under like sort of the management of employees, because as I think we only have one employee, and that's AJ. Everyone else is AJ's employee. We have not been super consistent. In fact, we've been terribly inconsistent on reviewing the general manager and on the way we're doing that, the way we have done it, but we are in the process of fixing that. So I just want to sort of name that as something that we are, that we are in the process we're working on.
Thank you. And we'll talk about that very question a little further down the list here. So, but thanks for identifying that. Anything else? Anybody else? So it sounds like there's some green and maybe some yellow there in this section, just in terms of you've identified some areas that you feel you need a little work on, and other areas are going pretty well. And so I think this might be an area where we want to have the green and the yellow. Any disagreement with that?
Terry, I don't share those same concerns that Dawn shared. So I would say green.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't share Dawn's concerns, but I have those other concerns, so I'm saying yellow. Okay.
And can we compromise on the line that is right between green and yellow?
I'll have to do some magic with the Excel there, but perhaps we could do a lime green or something. I mean, there's no demerits or score that is reduced by the colors. It's just a reminder of sort of what you talked about and what you thought there was a little caution about. So it's good to have the just to have the colors there to talk about. Okay, so we can move on to operational compliance and talk a little bit about overall regulatory compliance. And if you could share with me a little bit about your comfort level with how the district is meeting all the compliance laws, regulations, and any other expectations that are out there from regulatory type agencies that you have to deal with.
Yeah, Gary, sorry to jump in here, but maybe you can just clarify for us. This was confusing to me because we as board members have some regulatory and reporting obligations like conflict of interest stuff that we have to do on an annual basis, but not very much. But then
Right.
the agency has tons of regulatory and reporting obligations that we rely on staff for. I actually am not sure which of those buckets you're most interested in.
So in this question, we're most interested in the agency regulatory compliance. I don't expect any of you, well, I would be surprised if any of you had a very, a super detailed response about all these regulatory reports and compliance issues that staff are managing on your behalf. But at your level, you're ultimately responsible for that. And so it's about your comfort level with how the district is doing, meeting those things. And then we talk about if there's any issues with timeliness of reporting and that sort of thing.
I mean, this is really kind of a question for my fellow board members and AJ. I mean, we don't really do any of that stuff. That is all, I mean, the stuff that we have those obligations like that for are really all about budget, right? And then I guess contracts, I mean, sort of approving contracts, but we don't really have any, all the sort of stuff you deal with FTA and things like that. I feel like this section is not really relevant to us at the board level. Is that right?
I can answer that a little bit. When the agency that presents to the board once a year, they present to the board in part of their annual report. In this past year, happy to report there was no findings or recommendations, which is unusual, but it does vary from year to year. I will say they look at any other audits from the state that we've had or from the feds that we have, and they do report on it. And then once every 3 years, we do get a Federal Transit Administration audit, and the board president is typically the contact person. Due to the pandemic, that's been delayed. So the last person that got any update on that was Gary Wildish. And then in 2020, they contacted Carl, but we have not heard back. But as soon as FTA does, the board president does get that information, and they are the key point. It's just the FTA's behind. So, and typically the board president, all they do is they get like the document that says, what areas need to be done, and then the closeout. It's very standard, straightforward, but it does have the board president as their contact. We're just behind. So that's why this board hasn't seen it. The pandemic put everything behind. And then typically the board president would just make a comment that they've received a report and that the report is overall fine, or that there was findings and they'll give that. But so Caitlin, whenever we get that report, would likely do that as part of her comments. So just so you know, it's just the pandemic put that behind, but at some point we will hear from the FTA and the board would get a briefing, so.
Okay.
Helpful. Thank you, AJ.
Okay. Stephen?
Thanks, Terry. And thanks for those comments, AJ. But keying off of what Josh said, I think there's a situation where at the board level, we don't file a lot. We aren't in charge of that. And we rely on the GM and her management of the agency to be following all the guidelines. So we are briefed, as AJ said, and that's wonderful. But I think to a certain extent for the board as a whole, we don't know what we don't know regarding what hasn't been done. And so we might not know that. And I'm not saying there isn't anything that hasn't been done that should be done, but we just don't know what we don't know.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds to me like there's a process in place, but just due to this unique situation we're in right now, the audits are delayed. So I don't think we really need to rate that section right now because it's just a unique scenario. But I would like to ask a question in that third category about potential challenges coming in the future that you're aware of, that the board will either be talking about or trying to plan strategy around how to tackle those issues. If there's any new environmental compliance or anything that you are that's on your radar today that might fall in that realm of compliance and reporting. There may not be anything that's on your radar right now, and that's fine too. It's just one of our questions. Hearing nothing, I'll assume that there's nothing on your radar right now that you're worried about. So we'll give you a big green on that. So let's move on to budget and finance. And this is an area that is obviously very important. And it's important that the process that the board goes through in reviewing the budget and understanding how the budget is put together and considers the elements of the budget for final approval. It's important that that is a process that is making sense to everybody and that you're pleased with the way that process runs. So does anyone have anything to say about the budgeting process?
Yeah, I was just going to share that I've been really pleased with the way that the budget gets put together and is presented. I think it's done well in advance. We have plenty of time to ask questions, and I think it's been very thorough. And I think each year it gets more transparent and more concise. And I think it's really good work on our financial team's part. So I think, AJ, that's been a big push for you as well. So I really appreciate that. I think it's been really good.
Stephen?
Thanks, Terry. I just want to echo what Emily just said. I think particularly a call out goes to Christina Shu, who does excellent work, an excellent presentation. And I think that compliment rolls up then to AJ for giving her the leeway and the resources to do her good job.
Thank you. Does everyone else concur with that? And that would be a very positive rating, of a green rating in the budgeting process. Oh, Don?
Well, I do concur. It's just that, we've taken on a little different challenges with presenting the budget with the strategic business plan, the capital improvement plan. And so the presentation is a little bit different. So that was a tiny, a little bit of a challenge to compare to previous work that we've done. But I think basically is having a lot of faith in our budgeting staff and the general manager and, Christina again. And that makes it very easy to trust the agency. And we feel, at least I do, feel good about the staff work that's been done.
Okay.
Good point, Don. Thanks for saying that about the strategic business plan and those pieces weaving together. That's a good point.
Okay. So the other piece is just the soundness of the financial practices that lead into the budget and all kinds of financial projections and timeliness of reporting and the transparency to the board of just the day-to-day financial dealings of the agency. And I expect from those last comments that you have very positive feelings about that, but why don't you tell me a little bit about that and your financial management practices in general, and how you all feel about that from the staff level up?
I feel like every time I have a question, I always get an answer. So I feel positive about that, but I don't know that I have a lot more information beyond that to share.
Okay. Do you feel as a board that you get the materials you need in the board packets that you need to review regarding any financial decisions or financial updates on a monthly basis or whatever kind of frequency?
Yeah,
Josh?
I think we get good information. Oh, sorry, Josh, go ahead.
No, go ahead and finish, Emily.
Okay, my only thought was, I think for me, it's like the bigger picture. We have a lot of moving parts. And so it's a little bit hard sometimes to track where this piece left off and where this piece picked up and where we're at in the process. But I think all the materials provided, it's really just more of a learning curve or just sort of the way that those all sort of come together over time.
Okay. And Josh, you were?
Susan, go for it, please.
Well, I feel at a distinct disadvantage because I'm so new, but what I can say is how impressed I've been with the attentiveness of staff and the openness and encouraging of questions. And I feel actually quite confident that my learning curve is going to be very much related to the staff's participation. And from my perspective, it's been brief, but good.
Thank you. Josh, you want to?
Yeah, I'll share everyone's generally positive sentiment about budgeting practices and the transparency and reporting, and I would call out also the responsiveness and proactiveness of the GM and staff to get questions answered. The one thing I would say though is that we're headed into a very different time, and so I would want to sort of put an asterisk by and say we'll probably have very different, more dynamic within the fiscal year needs for thinking about our budgets that we have not typically had in the past when they've been pretty stable year to year.
Okay. So does that give you a reason for caution, Josh, or is that you feel like?
The only problem with, I feel green today. Will I feel yellow tomorrow? I think the problem is you don't want to, in all investment things, there's a little fine print at the bottom that says past performance is not a predictor of future performance. So, we just have to know that we will have, without question, some different needs, maybe need to build some different habits, that sort of thing. And so I think it's important not to read whatever, grade we're giving things right now as, source of complacency. That's all.
Okay. So it's more about just being aware of that and keeping your eye on the fact that things may need to shift a little bit in the future. Susan, did you have anything else to say? I just saw your hand was still up, so. But
I got kicked off my other computer, so I'm going back and forth between two, so I apologize.
All right, no, that's fine, that's fine. Okay, so we will move on to our next category of customer relations, and specifically a little bit about managing service problems. This may not be something that you deal with directly as a board, but I'm just interested in your observation about how the district is dealing with any service delivery problems of any kind that might arise. And, are you confident in knowing who's responding to those, and that you know, they aren't bubbling up to your level that you have to deal with them because no one else took care of those things. Josh?
Actually, I'll go last. I'll go last.
Okay.
We have other people go first.
Does anybody want to go first? Don?
Yeah, well, sometimes we hear, complaints about how the service is being delivered, but it's generally in relationship to the whole adjustment to the COVID situation. So mostly, at least the ones that I've dealt with have been, well, it's, that's what we're living through right now. And the whole society, everybody in the world is living through this right now. So there's some adjustment and there isn't it's just recognition that, gee, things used to be a little better than they are now. I'm assuming they'll be better again.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, Josh, I guess you're last.
That was fast. Anybody else on customer service? So I'll just put a pin in this for future discussion. I'll try to be brief, but actually I would just point out that we do not have like systematic customer satisfaction reporting that gets discussed regularly at the board level. And I would just say, and this is based on sort of my own experience, but also talking to people in the community, constituents really, lots of people in my sub-district, it is not obvious how one is supposed to give feedback to LTD. I would say, like, I challenge everyone to go on the website and like try to sort of imagine how you would report stuff. I'm not saying we're missing a lot, but it's actually, we haven't made it really, really easy. And so I actually have concern about, I'm not saying that we'd be opening floodgates, but like, I don't feel like we have a clear line to our customers. And it's sort of, I haven't talked about this recently because we've been so understandably pandemic focused, but it has been a lingering concern for me. Again, I think in general, people really like our service, but we are talking about making some substantial changes in the future. And so we will probably want to have the pulse of our customers much, much more going forward. So again, I'm like Mr. Asterisk next to all of your colors. Sorry.
Okay. I think it's these are perfect things to get on this document so that the board can, talk about them in the future. So thank you for that. So do we want that to be green or yellow or both? What do you guys feel about that?
Purplish brown. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's that halfway mark again.
Okay. All righty. And then the next one about improvements to customer service. And I think you just spoke to that most districts are always trying to improve on customer service and how service is delivered. And are there any other, beyond sort of a feedback mechanism for customers, are there any other aspects of service delivery that anyone sees areas for improvement or that you've already been in discussion about that I should hear about?
I think for me, the only piece is kind of that marketing discussion that we continue to have about how we're delivering information to people digitally, but also paper format for the folks who still need that. So I think from a delivery standpoint, it's just how we're continuing to get that message out proactively in sort of a variety of ways. But I think that's pretty high on the radar already.
Okay. Is there anything else, or does everyone agree with Emily's comment there?
Or disagree?
Or disagree? I was going for the positive. Okay. Well, I would give that a green because you're already talking about you've identified that as something you want to address. Okay, now we'll move on to personnel administration and staff morale and work climate. This is more of a perception because I'm assuming you're not with the staff every single day or interacting with them every single day, but what is your perception of the work climate in the agency and generally morale? Again, this is a really interesting snapshot right now. And so, you know, that is it makes it a little different. Caitlin?
So I would say I have probably the heaviest interaction with LTD staff out of this board. I interact with them, I would say on a fairly regular basis. Partly I'm involved doing the leadership training, and I asked to be part of that because I think it's important to work together and learn the strengths and learn the struggles of this group. And so I would say from a leadership standpoint, the team of directors has very high morale, feels very heard, feels like it's a collaborative environment, feels like there's opportunities for growth, and are very respected and generally very happy. Because there's these different tiers from leadership all the way down to, you know, so many bus operators and mechanics and so many different departments, there's gonna be some folks on the perimeter who are gonna be upset, and that's gonna be any organization. And I feel like because we do a climate survey, we thankfully get the opportunity to hear from those folks who have some dissatisfaction in their job. On the flip side, we also get to hear from folks who have satisfaction on their job. And I would say on a whole, the satisfaction heavily outweighs the dissatisfaction. So I would feel very comfortable saying green.
Thank you.
Wait, Caitlin, just as a clarifier, are you saying your sense from the surveys is that satisfaction heavily outweighs dissatisfaction?
Yeah, I would say surveys and my personal interactions with staff, not just through the training, but, you know, I used to go to all of the staff parties, like when we did the one at Splash and, you know, the bus rodeos and all the cool staff appreciation and engagement pieces that LTD puts on. I go to those and I listen and I talk, and that's how I hear these firsthand experiences.
That's really valuable. That's good, great feedback for the board to be able to have that perspective from the work you're doing with staff. Does anyone else have feedback on that?
I'm gonna respectfully disagree with Caitlin. I have some pretty general concerns about the climate. I think we're seeing a pretty clear dichotomy of folks who are very happy with folks who are very unhappy. And I think for the most part, we understand where some of that's coming from and why we're getting that feedback. But I just don't want to be too Pollyanna about everything being great, because there was some pretty clear dissatisfied comments in some of the surveys and some of the conversations I've had with folks.
Thank you.
I would put us in the yellow though, not the red on that.
Okay. Josh?
Yeah, I agree with all of the stuff Caitlin said about exec staff and the staff we interact with frequently, but I also completely agree with Emily's point. I mean, it was really what Emily said, like really, it's almost like two very different experiences. And quite large groups in each case, like people having with generally negative and people with generally positive feelings about the work environment. So to me, even if it is kind of split, that feels like it's in the red to me, because like we want a large percentage of staff being at least mildly happy, right? It shouldn't be like, hey, we got 49% of people. I mean, I think it was a source of concern for me, and we maybe haven't had or made quite enough space to talk about the surveys from not just this past year, but the year before. Yeah, that's source of concern for me.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have feedback about that, or a feeling about, I mean, it sounds like there's some green and maybe some sort of orange going on. Don?
Well, at least in my understanding of it, there was a coterie of people who were very unhappy, or at least expressed unhappiness in the climate survey. And I felt like a lot of that is related to, just general middle management turnover that happens in any organization. I know in this organization, we had a big bunch of turnover, 5-6 years ago, when people were just finishing their 30-year careers. And I think there's a group of people in the organization who appreciated the old supervisors who then retired, and then they just weren't happy with the replacements because of the difference. So I don't feel like there's a strong sense of unhappiness. I think there's a coterie of individuals who are not satisfied, and some who, well, it just feels like some are stirring it up. But my sense from reading the surveys and the comments and just looking at the number of participants on it was that generally the people were happy. They felt like they had a good job with LTD and that they did good service for the community. So I think they had a good sense of their own involvement in their organization and what they did. And that seemed very strong to me. And a lot of the other stuff, there was, general unhappiness. And as Caitlin said earlier, that in any organization with, 200-300 people, they're going to be unhappy. Some people are going to be unhappy just because they are. So I don't feel like, I feel it's more of a green, maybe slightly to the caution part, but certainly not red.
Thank you. Michelle?
Thank you. To echo Susan, I feel a little bit, I'm still a little new to the board, so I don't have anything to compare this year to last year with, but I would agree that surveys they're important, but they're also very subjective. So I think without actually, talking to those employees directly and really understanding where that's coming from, which I trust our, AJ and the management teams are doing, I would definitely want to keep a pulse on it, but I don't know that I would put it in a danger zone.
Thank you for that. Well, this is great feedback. This is always a topic of concern and lots of conversation in any organization. So what do you all think? Are we at the green, yellow, or I heard some red in there. So you tell me, where do you think you are? I could do all three.
I don't know that we need to settle on a color. I think if you can just represent that there's sort of a diversity of views and concerns, I think that's fine. I mean,
okay.
That's how I feel. I think what you heard is sort of a bunch of kind of, diverse viewpoints that are not going to reconcile into a single data point as I see it. But folks, you tell me what you think is reasonable.
I like the yellow compromise just because it's right in the middle.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment? I'm good with the green, yellow. All right.
Wait, actually, I heard yellow, and then you just rounded up to green, yellow. If you're going to take the colors seriously, let's stick with Emily's compromise color. That's what I would say.
Well, okay. All right. We'll go with the compromise color.
Wait, I missed who said red.
I said red because I feel like, and actually I would just say, like, I read every single one of the survey results from the last two surveys, the two that since I've been around. And so I want to be clear. I'm not going on impressions. I'm going on like having used all of the data that we have to the extent that we have it. And so I just said, to me, red is not reserved for like if half of the organization is ready to walk out the door. We should be thinking about like, you know, what do we want? Like, how many people do we want to have who are genuinely dissatisfied? Sure, there were some people who were just like really angry in ways where you're like, wow, you're just always an unhappy person. These sort of what you're suspecting. But there were criticisms of kind of every tier of the organization from a vantage point that I just don't have as a board member. And we haven't really sort of digested those at all. To me, that feels like it's in the red category. It's not like things are about to implode, but it's like it's the highest level of concern. I mean, sort of concerns throughout the organization. So that was why I was saying red, Caitlin. But I can compromise with yellow.
Okay, we're gonna go with yellow. Oh, Dawn?
Well, I'm thinking that, for the last year, we've kind of eliminated our employee of the month. And that was something that I relied upon for years, that we would have the employee of the month come up and their supervisor would speak about what they did and the employee spoke about what they did. And across the board, all of these individuals who, of course, were the high performing ones, were the employee of the month, but they would always speak about how happy they were to work with this organization, how much they enjoyed their team they worked with. And I'm missing that right now. I think we could include that in our board meetings again to get the feeling from the employee of the month. Now, maybe we could have another category for disgruntled employee of the month, and then get a better balanced sense of it. But I don't feel it's a serious proposal, but I do miss the employee of the month part. And I feel like I use that as a gauge to get a sense of the broader organization.
Thanks for sharing that, Dawn.
Okay, so the next section is about the management of employee performance. And really this is, Josh, back to the being specific about annual employee performance reviews and understanding that the board is only responsible for the general manager performance evaluation, but as an agency, it's important to have a consistent process in place and timely review through the ranks of the organization of employee performance. So I think, Josh, your comment, and I can reflect that here about some inconsistencies with, and maybe you could say a little more about that now about the inconsistencies and your concerns about the performance evaluation of the general manager.
Oh, just that we've been inconsistent in the past, and I think we're in the process of rectifying it. So it's sort of weird to give us a grade. I mean, like it's kind of hard to, yeah, it's that simple.
Okay, and then so that addresses the general manager position, but what about throughout the agency? Are you confident that there's a system in place and there's, I understand some may be covered in labor agreements, and but are you confident that there is a regular process that's consistently being delivered to staff? And it looks like Stephen has a comment.
Thanks, Terry. Regarding the employee performance heading, it's my understanding that the agency has guidelines in place, but I think at the board level, we simply don't have the visibility into that to tell if they're being followed to a T or less so. And again, I'm not saying they are or are not, but we just simply don't know. And I can be corrected by fellow board members who've been on longer, maybe Dawn or someone else knows, but I don't think we get any reports that state that the number of people who were due for a review in a given month were given it in the month or they were late. So again, I don't think the board has visibility onto how it's executed at the staff level.
Okay. I think that one of the interesting sort of intersections between employee satisfaction and performance evaluations is really that those two kind of need to live together for staff to really feel that they are getting the feedback so that they are aware of areas for improvement or areas where they're excelling. And that just might be something that maybe once a year, the board would like to hear if, reviews of employee performance are being delivered on time. I'm not saying you have to, get into great detail, but it might be part of something that you want to hear at a board meeting once a year, just so you know that. Josh, do you have something you want to say?
I think that's maybe the appropriate level to keep it. I like the way you said it, Terry. I would just stress that we are a policy board, and to the extent that we would look at the questions you're describing, we really should be looking at them through our assessment of the general manager's performance. Like that is actually kind of enshrined in our governance structure. So I just want to say we don't manage staff. Like the GM is the only person who is our, as I said before, our only employee. And so like, I think it's just important to keep that piece in the mix. But I mean, everything you said sounds fine. And the 1 year interval is probably as frequently as we would do that.
Great. Well, and thank you for that. I think that it's totally appropriate to have that as part of the evaluation of the general manager and ask those sorts of questions. I think that's a perfect avenue for that. So it sounds like that should be a green because you feel like you're back on track with regular evaluations for the general manager. Is that how the board feels about that?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. The next one is about the alignment of positions with work assignments, and that this may be something that doesn't apply to you so much, but about whether position descriptions accurately reflect the work that staff are doing. And I expect that may, don't talk to me about it, right, Josh?
Not appropriate for our board structure.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Do not put a color in there, Terry.
I'm not going
to. You're speaking about like pink or Carolina blue or mauve. No, that's like and not applicable.
Seafoam green? No. Okay, I'm just making a note. All right. We are clipping right along here. You guys are almost done with me. Okay. So back to a discussion about policies and procedures and about the soundness of administrative policies and if you feel that the policies are in place and up to date and there oftentimes are as you discussed earlier about bylaws and there being some gaps there in the bylaws and things they address, there's often an observation made that there are gaps in policies and that people are sort of making up decisions about how to do certain things, and there's no policy there. So I'd just like to hear if you feel like there are appropriate policies in place. Any comment about that? Are you beyond board policies? Let me ask it this way: are you ever involved in sort of reviewing administrative policies and talking about any of that as a board?
I mean, I'll just, maybe I can get us through this one quickly. You said something at the end of what you said, Terry, that sounded very different from soundness of administrative policy. So let me just focus on, as it's written here. I would think that this is a dark green. I feel like we have, especially in the recent past, been through some revision of our policies, and exec staff have done an exquisite job of telling us what they're changing and how they're changing it. So like helping, like updating all of our procurement and purchasing policies is maybe the best example. I think they've been really transparent with us at the policy level about about what they're doing and why. So I think that's maybe the sort of the highest level takeaway. So yeah, on this, but you started to get into like, are people doing things? There's policy at the level of what the board sets, and then there are kind of operational policies in the organization. I'm talking about those operational policies.
Right.
The administrative policies, that's where I feel like we're doing great.
Okay. That's what I wanted to hear. Anybody else have a view on that or a comment?
I would agree with Josh, Terry, that at the board level, and I don't know if the other board members will agree, but I believe the subcommittees that we have do a good job of gathering information and funneling it up to the broad board, the whole board. So in that sense, I would agree with Josh's comments.
Okay, thank you. Dark green, it sounds like.
British racing green.
Not seafoam.
Not seafoam, never seafoam. Okay, and then this question about consistency between work practices and policies. And really, I'm getting at policies being consistently followed and adhered to. And I guess what really is of more interest is, I mean, you entrust that to your GM and the executive team to ensure that that's happening. But if there was a problem in any of those areas, if somebody was not following policy, how would you hear about that? Would that come from AJ and you would, or is that something that you wouldn't come up to your level?
I can chime in for just a second, unless someone else would like to say something.
Go ahead.
I think this is similar to a past question, and that is, we don't know what we don't know. So if a policy is not being followed or a practice is not being followed, we don't interact with the staff except for our board president, Caitlin. So we just have no direct funnel for this information. And I'm not even sure it's our lane to be in. I think that is more the GM and the executive staff's lane and not the board's lane.
Okay.
I support what Stephen says.
Okay.
that as well. I don't think that's our lane to be in.
Okay. All right. Then I'll give you a big dark green on that one.
Hang on, Don has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Don.
You know, we've just gone through this situation where something percolated up to the board level, you know, kind of sidestepped the whole chain of command and dragged us all through a whole thing with, you know, well, I don't know how to describe it, but it was an unfortunate, I feel, well, it was an opportunity for people within the organization to express themselves. I don't feel like it was a real appropriate way to do it. And so perhaps there needs to be an intermediate, an ombudsman or something within the group to allow that to happen, so that, you know, the board doesn't become embroiled in, you know, some unhappiness in a work group somewhere that then we have to decide about whether we're going to be due diligence to have to deal with the question or not, which I feel shouldn't have come to us. But then once it comes to us, then we have to deal with it or ignore it. And if there's something, I think Stephen said it in one, well, no, these are executive sessions. I guess this is an executive session as well, but mentioned that there was a possibility of the tip of the iceberg. So it was an unsettling situation for myself, but perhaps we've worked through this and have a stronger organization because of that. So that's hopeful. But you know, there's some not totally dark and green situation in this case.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any comments about this item? Okay. So, do you agree that we should give you a green in this area? With maybe just a note about, you know, maybe there should be an avenue for things that rise up sort of on a side track from the way it should, and how the board should deal with that?
How about an NA, as in not applicable?
Okay. Does everyone?
Yeah, just so I understand, I mean, consistency between work practices and like administrative policies. I mean, if that's the thing, if that's the way to describe the word policies there, in that case, you know, we have a union and we have like in-house counsel, and so like we have mechanisms in place for serious concerns. If there are other concerns that should go in here, I don't know. I mean, and then we do an employee survey, so like I'm not really sure what else we need here. I mean, are we missing like a particular type of mechanism that we're supposed to have as either a safety net or something more proactive? I don't know. I guess that's what I'm trying to understand.
My opinion, and this is just me speaking, but it sounds like you have the appropriate mechanisms in place. Often, not often, occasionally, someone will choose another route that may come directly to the board, and that's not does not happen often enough that I would say that you need a mechanism for dealing with that. It's just sometimes things happen and the board has to figure out a way to navigate through something. So it sounds like you have appropriate mechanisms in place within your agency as it is.
Yeah, I think that's well put, Terry. I guess I just want to keep drawing the distinction. Actually, everybody's gone from the room I'm in. Now I can take this thing off. I think that's fine, but we have to be clear about what we mean by policies. It's not policies set by the board, it's the policies for administering the organization. And I draw that distinction because, you know, as I think you probably well know, lots of public sector organizations set policy at the governance level and then disregard it, right? I mean, cities, counties do this all the time. They sort of set policy and then sort of struggle to like be consistent with their own policy declarations. And so that I think is actually a much bigger concern. As we make policy, we have to figure out how it gets implemented. And so I just wanted, that distinction is not drawn here, but I think maybe it should be.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
And to be clear, I don't think we have that problem. I think actually we've been pretty good in my time on the board as a group, sort of holding ourselves to our goals. But yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. So the final question is about efficiency of staff and work systems and whether or not there are any obstacles that you're aware of the staff getting their work done. Anything that's on your radar that you've talked about, or any challenges out there to the staff really getting their work done. It may be one of those items that doesn't come to the board. Steven.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Terry. I think this is like some of the other questions. It's NA. Right. It's not our lane, and it really doesn't come to the attention of the board, nor really should it. I think that gets funneled up to the appropriate seat, and that would be the GM, AJ.
Okay. Lucky AJ. All right. That concludes my little format sheet here. And as I said at the start, I will summarize the notes and hopefully capture the conversation as you remember it. And I will be sending you, yes, I'll be sending you both a memo and with some recommendations, which really are just things we've already talked about, with the assessment. And then in 60 days, you'll get an email from me just checking in to see that you've had some conversations about some of the things that were brought up tonight. So I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your candidness. This was a really good conversation. Not all boards engage as well, and you all did a really nice job. I know it's a really unique environment we're all thriving in right now, so I appreciate your attention to this and your participation. And that's all I have for you.
Thank you for your time, Terry.
Thank you, Terry.
All right,
Terry.
thank you.
Caitlin, can I ask a question before Terry gets off?
Yes.
Terry, just for the board's information, how often is this training required? And I know it's not called a training, that's what we call it, only because it's not our regular agenda item. And I just think it's important for the board to plan ahead and as we work forward.
So it's not an annual it's not on a regular schedule. This is part of SDAO's best practices program. So it's not on a regular schedule. Boards can request it if they feel like they're having some discord within the board, or there's some desire for board members to have an open conversation with some structure to it. So it's not anything you have to plan for.
Okay, thank you. And I'll follow up with the board, also letting them know that their time here does come with a discount to the district, and I'll get that dollar amount over to the board at the next board meeting. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
If this represents best practices, can we spend those savings on like little trophies for each of us or something? Would that be appropriate? Or
Josh, it's only 4%.
Okay, never mind.
Good night, folks. Thank you.
All right, our meeting is officially adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.